Move it, move the wheel. That's right. Look at that. This is a Stirling engine. It's a little engine and it runs on the energy. In this case, it's running from a hot cup of water, some water that I just boiled, and the heat from the water is what's running the motor. Actually, what's running the motor is the fact that it's hot underneath and cold on top. So actually what this motor runs on is any difference of temperature. It could be hot underneath and cold on top, or cold underneath and hot on top, or just normal temperature on one side and very, very hot on the other side. Any difference of temperature where it's a little bit colder on one side and hotter on the other side is what makes this engine work. And in this video, we're gonna explain how this super cool engine works. It's called a Stirling engine, and it's named after Robert Stirling. He was a Scottish inventor that lived in the early 1800s, and he came up with this very clever idea. So first of all, the first thing we need to understand is what happens to air when it gets heated. What happens to air when it gets hot, and what happens to air when it gets cold again? Now, when air gets hot, heat is energy. When air gets hot, when it gets filled with energy, it starts to move around. All the little atoms and molecules of air, they all get sort of restless, like when you're full of energy. You don't want to sit still on the couch, right? You want to move around and buzz and shake, and it takes more space. You wouldn't fit in a little tiny box. You want to go play outside and take up lots of space. Well, that's what happens with air when it gets filled with energy. It wants to take up lots of space. So we're going to do an experiment first to show you how air expands and takes up more space. Yeah, we're going to show you in just a minute how air takes up more space when it gets filled with heat, with the energy from heat, okay? What's gonna happen if I push out the air? There's a little bit of air in here. What's gonna happen when I pour hot water on the bottle? The air inside is gonna get hot. What do you think is gonna happen? The air inside is expanding, and look, it pushed out the bottle and now it's all full. What do you think's gonna happen if I pour cold water back on it? Shall we see? Now we're gonna pour cold water on it and see what happens. Cold water. The air inside is going to shrink again. It's gonna compress, and look what's happening. The bottle is getting all squished up again like it was before because the air inside is getting smaller, so it's taking up less space. And the pressure of the air outside, all the air that's around us, is pushing on it like this. And so it gets all squished again. And if we pour some more hot water back on it, what's gonna happen? The air inside is gonna get filled with energy and it's gonna move around. I need more space, need more space, and need more space. And up, the bottle gets inflated again because the air inside expanded. So how does this work? Inside this engine, there's a little chamber of air, and it's airtight. That means the air can't escape. No air can get in, no air can get out. And what happens when the air inside gets hot? Like we saw in the bottle, it wants to take up more space, and there's nowhere for the air to go. The only way for the air to make any more space is to push up this piston. Push it up like that to make more space for us to move, right? But what happens when the piston gets pushed up is it turns the wheel, and the wheel moves around this little thing inside, this little disc that goes up and down. It's called a displacer. A displacer just means it's an air mover, right? So what does it do? When the piston is down, the air displacer is on top. So all the air is at the bottom getting the heat from this cup of tea, from this cup of hot water. So the air is getting hot, but when it pushes up the piston to make more space for the air to expand, it pushes down the displacer. Pushes the displacer toward the bottom, and all the air goes up to the top where it's cool. And it loses energy. When it gets cool and loses energy, what did we see? What happens to the bottle, to the air when it gets cold? It It shrinks, right?
It shrinks, right?
And when it shrinks, it creates a vacuum. And when it
When
creates a
it
vacuum,
gets
smaller.
more and more,
when it gets
bigger.
Yes, and then when it gets cooler again, it gets smaller, and that sucks the piston back down.
And it gets bigger.
Not when it gets cooler. When it gets cooler, it gets smaller. Like when you lose your energy and you go and you lay on the couch with your brother and you get all small and cuddly, right? Well, the air is the same. When it's all cold and it loses its energy, it cuddles up all nice and close together, and it takes less space, and that creates a vacuum. So the air outside pushes the piston back down. But what does that do? When it pushes the piston back down, the air displacer goes up, which pushes all the air back down to the bottom where the heat is, where the energy is.
And it pushes back up.
Afterwards. But here it pushes all the energy down and it gets full of, it pushes the air back down and it gets filled with energy and it pushes it back up, and then it goes round and round and round and over and over and over again. And that is how a Stirling engine works.